run the By the way, John, if you follow BusinessWeek, is the senior editor who is in charge of the BusinessWeek.com. He's got all the web-based. John has run the magazine. He's the one charged with building the website of BusinessWeek. He left for a couple years and was editor of Fast Company, then came back to BusinessWeek. And I thought I'd turn it over for a little dialogue here, and then we'll open it up for all of you to join in. But John, maybe that's triggered a few questions for Ricardo.
Great, thank you, and good morning to all of you.
Morning, John.
Ricardo, let's start in 1987. You're 32 years old. You're sitting in a conference room in Mexico City. You're at one end of the table, and your father is at the other end. Mm-hmm. You've worked for your father's company for a number of years, and you're increasingly frustrated. And the senior management team is around that table, and something happened that surprises everyone in the room. Talk a little bit about it.
Well, you know, my dad invited me to work for his company when I was, in 1981, I was like 26 or so. And I had already had some experience in the U.S., and I had lots of work experience because every time during the summers I would work at different companies. So I thought I was really prepared to lead and to take over any company. So I go into
That's what an MBA education can do.
Yeah. Nothing to it. So after a few years at Electra, at that time Electra was a very small company. We only had 50 stores and about 2,000 employees. Half of them were in manufacturing, half of them were in the stores. We used to build radio and TV sets, of all things, you know, to compete with Sony. Wow. So there was lots of things that needed to be done, but there's no space for two leaders. One guy has to lead. So it's going to be either my dad or myself. And I was at the point where I said, well, I'm going to leave and go do my stuff because this thing is just too much hassle, you know, trying to convince him of everything. So we'd have these meetings and, you know, we'd sit here and, you know, he'd speak and everybody talked that way and I'd speak and they'd talk this way. And that was the company doing this. No good. So I think my dad made a very good judgment and said, well, I'm going to let him run the business. I'm going to step back. And he retired when he was really young, like 57.
Right. And he just announced this in the meeting, then walked out of the room, right?
Yeah, that was my...
Were you shocked?
No, I think I was sort of expected it.
You were. And you were prepared?
Yeah.
What did you want to do that he didn't want to do?
Well, we had to we had to get out of manufacturing. Building and designing electronics, that's way out of line for a Mexican company. I mean, can only be done in Japan and Korea and whatnot. That's not a place to be. And so we had to get out of that, close that down, and then focus on the retailing and the financing, which is the core of the business. At the same time, we need to change suppliers from what we had, you know, of parts into semi-knockdown parts or final product, put our name that. So to do all that, it was really traumatic, you know, because the origin of Electra was building radios, you know, and my dad is always a tinker. He's more like an inventor. So he loved to go in there and see the circuits and do stuff, you know. But it was like a hobby, not a business.
What was your first big challenge after taking over in '87?
Well, Mexico was in the midst of a huge crisis. This thing that I said about the devaluation, it went on. It went first from 20 to 200, and then from 200 to 800, you know. And by the way, now it's 13,000 if you do the equivalent exchange rate. So we were always in the midst of crises. And when I took over, my dad said, the only thing you cannot do is take on debt. No debt, which I think was pretty smart. Because debt is really a very dangerous sword, and It cuts and it gets you through, but it can only cut your head off. And we went through that later. When you say that, was I prepared? No, I was not prepared, but I was so aggressive and full of energy that we could get things done. And then I was lucky.
So how did you finance the company's growth without going to the debt market?
Well, the first thing we did was we stopped giving credit, because if you want to finance, you have to have a source of funding, right? I mean, finance 101. So there was no credit in Mexico, so that we were not going to finance. So we changed the model of the business to a kind of a Walmart style, where everything is low price, one price all the time, very low margins, very high turnover, small selection of items, away from this model where everything is financeable and you have a huge amount of SKUs, high margins. That was a huge change. And that's how we financed it, because it was a cash business.
Right, so you use your cash flow.
Yeah. Until much later, when the markets opened up, we went back into the credit business, which is very profitable, but you need funding.
Right.
That's why we started Banco Azteca.
And the key part of the Mexican market is trying to tap the bottom of the pyramid. The so-called bottom of the pyramid is defined by C.K. Prahalad, right?
Yeah.
That's a core part of your strategy, yes? How do you do that?
Well, first, I would caution about saying the bottom of the pyramid is just in the Mexican market. Even in the United States, there's a huge bottom of the pyramid. The thing is, nobody talks about it. But here in America, almost, 40% of households make less than $25,000 a year. That's pretty much close to the bottom of the pyramid. And the same happens all over the world. Well, Europe is different, but certainly in Latin America, in Asia, Japan is different. But those consumers are out there, and they watch TV, and they have aspirations. The thing is, they cannot afford it because of their income level. So you have to really think about what is it that they could afford and how to deliver that. You know, for example, when we opened up the bank 7 years ago, we started from nothing, and today we have 6 million deposit holders, about 7 million people with credit, and nobody thought it could be done. But the way that we did it was with huge amounts of technology that makes it very easy to open an account, very low cost, no paperwork. We won't send you a bill, an account statement. We won't mail you an account statement. But we'll take your picture and your digital fingerprint on a biometric, and we'll have that available in the system in any store, so you can walk in any store and say, how much do I owe, or how much do I have? And this is me, and I'm John, I want to take this money out. We'll pay it to you. So it's new technology that allows you to deliver these services with very low cost.
Right.
Take all the costs out of the system, and different kind of product. Okay? For example, we do not offer checking accounts.
Why is that?
Because they're very expensive to process. Huh? The check is the absolutely worst invention of the American banking system. It's a very bad idea. A check is a piece of paper that says, I promise that I'll pay you. So I give it to you, and now you have my promise. Now you have to take my promise to your bank, and then your bank has to take it to my bank, and my bank has to take it to me and say, do you want to pay? There's no way. It doesn't. There's too many ifs.
So it's like you go to your ATM, you get your cash, and you pay in cash. That's
or what you do is we set you up an account with a plastic card that works in any ATM, and you can access your money anytime you want in our machines for zero cost. That's another big thing. We don't charge any commissions. Mm-hmm. So it's a very disappointing thing for people who have a small amount of money, like $5, $10, or $15, and they charge a commission $5 a month, and then 3 months they have no money. You know, what's this? Savings? No. So no commissions. The money we make is taking the depositor's money and investing it wisely in loans, which is what the bank should have done in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, and not mess around with the stock market and stuff, you know. That's what we do.
Now, Ricardo, when you first took over the company, it was basically a retailer with a manufacturing arm. The company is very much a conglomerate now. It's involved in lots of different things, from banking to telecommunications to retailing. In the U.S., many conglomerates are out of favor, partly because they're complicated, they're hard to run and manage, partly because Wall Street can't understand them, right? Because analysts specialize in a given area, and a conglomerate is free-ranging and it's all over the place. So what is it about your belief in the conglomerate system that makes you believe that's a better model for you and for Mexico?
Well, my personality is, of course, very much in favor of that, because I like to do lots of different things. I have lots of interests, and I'm curious, and if you show me a business, I probably get interested in it, except if it's a restaurant. So that's part of what attractive to me. But I'd say on a big scale, what happens is, in Mexico, or in a small economy, a smaller country, a smaller economy, conglomerates make sense because the people in Mexico, for example, I know a lot about what happens in Mexico, how it works, what doesn't work. It's easy for me to make business in Mexico because I know the territory very well. It doesn't matter if it's going to be a mine or a cell phone company or a bank. I know the territory well, and the customers understand it. So that's an advantage. And of course, when you're in a small territory and you build one business, pretty soon it gets as big as it's going to get. It's big for that market. Now, that opens up the question, what are you going to do next? Well, we're going to go into the mining business or the banking business or whatever, because this business is kind of mature. Now, that is different in the United States because this market is so huge, you know, like let's say if you started with, I don't know, whatever, a franchise, like Chick-fil-A or whatever, you have plenty of time to cover the United States with Chick-fil-A. You might have time in your life to become a conglomerate. So that's a difference. But one of the things that is definitely in favor of conglomerates is this idea of management best practices that you can spread across the businesses. And the prime example of this is GE.
Right.
That's a conglomerate. Now, it's very difficult to run a conglomerate, and you need very strong leadership. That's why Welch was so, high profile and famous and recognized for all that. And yeah, it works. I would recommend reading the managing book by Harold Jeaning, who made ITT, and he explains very well why is it that conglomerates are good. But it is complicated. And, for lazy analysts in Wall Street, it's much too complicated. They could never handle that.
A lot of the students here over the next 2 years will focus on the how. How do you create a business plan? How do you plot strategy? How do you market a product? How do you do, dare I say, discounted cash flow analysis? Well, let's focus on the why. What's your purpose, and what is your company's purpose, you think?
Well, let's see. The main thing is you have to enjoy what you're doing again. Why? Because I enjoy it. Why do you play a game? Why do you play baseball? Because you like it. So why are you in business? First, you have to enjoy it. And then because you want to win. There's no sense playing a game if you want to lose, What's in that?
You've got to be competitive if you want to win in business.
Absolutely competitive.
Yeah.
And you have to worry about the competition every day, every hour, especially if you're in the entrepreneurial side, right? So, yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of motives why. I mean, why are we in the television business in Mexico? Yeah, first it was a totally lucky thing. It had to do with chance, a situation that developed that put us there. But why do we keep on doing that business? Well, it's fascinating in many respects. It's a possibility to travel through the air and get into people's homes and be a guest in their homes and tell them what's going on and entertain them. It's a fantastic possibility of development. There's all kinds of angles to that. but there's also a business to run, right? And there's also a competition. We need to beat the other guys in the ratings every night. This is like running an election every night, and you get the results next day. So that's the why. But you mentioned something about business plans, and I'd like to sort of go back to that for a second. You know, I get all kinds of pitches for businesses. Should we buy this? Should we invest in this? And the first thing I get is, you know, the 10-year projections. 10-year projection of it. What are we thinking about here, guys? 10 years? 2019? Anybody got a clue of where you're going to be in 2019? And they tell me precisely the interest rate, precisely the exchange rate, precisely the amount of sales for year 10. So I'll share a story with you about this. When we were buying TV Azteca, it was 93, there was this government auction that the government sold out the television interest because they had already lost billions of dollars running this, mismanaging the company with public money. Instead of building schools and hotels and stuff, they were wasting money in television. So there was one big monopoly that had 100% of sales, and this that had assets, it had 300 licenses, but had no audience and no sales. So we typically, you know, we call the consultants from the US. They're good. So they made this 10-year plan, and they came back and said, this thing is worth precisely $489.5 million. 489.5. Why? Well, look, because in year 5 you're going to have 32% market share, and the market is going to be so big and so bad. Okay. So I took the model home and was looking at it and said, well, gee, what happens if instead of having 22% market share, I have 32% market share? Run back the numbers. Ah, well, that changes everything. Now the thing is worth $6 billion. So here we go. From 489 to $6 billion with 10% point spread in market share in 5 years. And I said, the hell, you know, I don't have $6 billion, so I'm going to put everything that I have in here. Which, by the way, was a very good and bad judgment. You know, risky, because we actually paid $650, which was all I could get my hands on at that time. And this was by mortgaging the whole of Electra and the TV. So if things went wrong, I wouldn't be here with, you know, a footnote of history, and, well, they lost their money and that's it.
Yeah.
But of course things went right, and here we are. But that's the thing with business plans. Instead of focusing on the actual number, try and think of it as something that opens up possibilities, scenarios. If it happens that you have 22%, it's going to be worth 400. But if it happens that you have 32, it's going to be worth $6 billion. So what's in between? What does it depend? How confident are you that you can manipulate these variables to move from here to there? And that's the use of a business plan, but not as it's a typically cover your ass situation for bureaucrats. Yeah, well, we did it by the business plan. And here's the consultant also.
Right. Yeah. Which consultant did you hire, incidentally?
It's actually not a bad consulting firm. They're called Bain and Company, and they've done very well.
I think there are a few people here who probably want jobs with Bain in 2 years. Yeah.
No, they actually did good, and they have a venture capital firm that's done very well.
Yes, Bain
Maybe
Capital.
they didn't follow their advice.
Well, now we'll throw it open to...
Yeah, let me, before I throw it open to the group, one topic you haven't touched on in this dialogue, and I'd like to ask you about, Ricardo, is the role of business in society. Mm-hmm. I've worked with you the last year and a half, and we've had thousands of your people go out and do community service. You support a school for kids that is outstanding. We had thousands and thousands of people picking up garbage in Mexico to kind of demonstrate we're going to take care of the environment. How does that fit into your view of business leadership?
Well, you see, it's all about balance, Noel, because in the business of business, you get so into it, and you get so competitive. You want to win. It's really easy to go overboard and start doing really stupid things with your life, with your people, and with your community. So the way to keep yourself in balance is to be able to open your eyes to other things that exist and that are very important in the community, and to be part of turning that around and doing things. So that's why I think it's so important for businesses and businessmen to not think about business all the time, even though it's so important. But you have to have this balance. And it's something very enjoyable, because we have a guy there who runs our foundation. He has a good phrase. He says, the guy who gives makes more than the guy who receives. It's a tricky one, because you have to experience it to actually know what he's talking about. But it's very satisfactory, and I would highly recommend that people do get involved in community action as a way to have a sense of balance in life.
By the way, John, if you follow BusinessWeek, is the senior editor who is in charge of the BusinessWeek.com. He's got all the web-based, John has run the magazine. He's the one charged with building the website of BusinessWeek. He left for a couple years and was editor of Fast Company, then came back to BusinessWeek. And I thought I'd turn it over for a little dialogue here, and then we'll open it up for all of you to join in. But John, maybe that's triggered a few questions for Ricardo.
Great, thank you, and good morning to all of you.
Morning, John.
Ricardo, let's start in 1987. You're 32 years old. You're sitting in a conference room in Mexico City. You're at one end of the table, and your father is at the other end. Mm-hmm. You've worked for your father's company for a number of years, and you're increasingly frustrated. And the senior management team is around that table, and something happened that surprises everyone.